Pack your things. You don't belong here." The words cracked across the boardroom like a gavel, sharp and merciless. At the head of the long mahogany table, a man in a navy suit leaned forward, finger stabbing the air like an accusation made flesh. His voice didn't just echo against the paneled walls, it carried an intent to erase. The woman in white didn't rise. She was on one knee, not because she had surrendered, but because a cardboard box filled with her life had just been kicked to the floor. Frames clattered, papers fanned like wounded birds. A trophy rolled, the engraved plate flashing once before it landed near the chair legs. She gathered them in silence, steady hands against the chaos. No one helped. Not the suited directors lining the walls, not the assistants clutching folders, eyes darting between their notes and the spectacle unraveling before them. Their silence was complicit, louder than any insult. One man smirked, another pretended to adjust his tie, though his gaze lingered, hungry for humiliation. The CEO, though no one in the room dared to call her that, now lifted the fallen photograph, a family portrait in silver frame. For a moment her thumb brushed against the glass, as if to ground herself not in this hostile boardroom but in the truth of who she was. Then she slid it back into the box with the same precision she used to close multi-million-dollar deals. The man towered above her, veins raised in his neck, demanding spectacle. "You've wasted this board's time long enough. Security will handle the rest." She didn't flinch. She didn't even look up. Her eyes traced the edge of the wooden table, polished to a gloss that reflected the overhead lights like a courtroom stage. Her stillness became the story. Someone in the corner tapped their phone. Not a text, a recording. The red dot glowed faintly, documenting every syllable that struck like a lash. A whisper slid across the room. "She's finished." But the woman in white wasn't finished. Not by far. She rose slowly from her crouch, box pressed against her hip. Calm, controlled, not defiant, not submissive, simply immovable. Every inch of her body language contradicted the insult hurled at her. She stood as if the floor itself had chosen her. The man's voice sharpened again, cutting through the tension. "You are done here." For a beat, silence. Then her reply, low, deliberate, meant not for him, but for the walls, the witnesses, the history pressing down on this room. "You've mistaken silence for weakness. That will be your last mistake." And before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. The box at her side felt heavier now, not with shame, but with something gathering, something about to turn. The boardroom's silence was surgical. Chairs lined the polished table like jurors waiting for a verdict. Behind the glass walls, the city skyline glared down steel, glass, and money, reminding everyone that power lived here. Or so they thought. She adjusted the box against her hip, eyes moving across the men and women who had just watched her crawl on the carpet for scraps of her own life. No one had moved to help. Not one hand had reached for the frame, the papers, the awards. That was the point. They didn't see her as belonging. What they didn't know, she had come prepared for this moment. Dressed in white, simple, clean, deliberate, no jewelry, no entourage, no gleaming watch to scream wealth. Just the steady posture of a woman who could lose everything in a room like this and still walk out unbroken. She wore quiet like armor. A memory pressed in, sharp as the glass towers outside. 23 years old. She had walked into a bank branch on the south side of the city with her first real commission check clutched in her hand. The teller had stared, lips curling into that same smirk she saw now, and said, "We'll need to hold this for verification." They froze her account for weeks. She had survived on ramen and grit, and she had promised herself, "One day, I won't just walk into a bank, I'll own it." Now she stood here, inside a boardroom that answered to her on paper, yet dismissed her in person. The irony was thick, almost choking. A junior associate shifted near the back wall. He was young, not long out of grad school, and the expression on his face didn't match the others. Where the board members smirked or frowned, he looked unsettled. His phone angled slightly, not for a text, but for proof. His lips pressed thin as if he couldn't decide whether to speak. The man in the navy suit noticed. His hands slammed against the table, rattling the glasses of water. "Eyes forward. This is a board meeting, not a circus." The young associate froze, but the red dot on his screen glowed steady. She placed the box gently on the table. The sound was soft, but in the silence it carried weight. Her gaze lifted finally, meeting every eye one by one. No apology, no plea, just quiet recognition. "I see you." Her voice was low, controlled. "And I see exactly what you've chosen to ignore." A few directors shifted in their chairs. One cleared his throat. Another scribbled notes furiously, as if distraction could absolve him. The man in the navy suit leaned closer, his shadow stretching across the table. "You're done here," he repeated, savoring each word. But her silence didn't bend. If anything, it sharpened the air. She had walked into this room knowing she'd be underestimated, knowing they'd measure her by what she wore, not what she owned. And she had allowed it. Because this wasn't her ending, it was their test. The skyline beyond the glass loomed, a city full of history, bias, and old money. But in her reflection on the window, she didn't see defeat. She saw inevitability. The air shifted, heavier now, as though the boardroom itself had chosen sides. Chairs creaked as directors leaned back, no longer pretending to be neutral. One of them, a silver-haired woman in a tailored gray suit, spoke first. Her tone dipped in mock courtesy. "Frankly, I never understood why we entertained this experiment," she said, eyes sweeping the woman in white. "Leadership is about image, and with all due respect, you never quite looked the part." A ripple of agreement moved around the table, murmurs like insects buzzing in stale air. Another director chuckled under his breath. "Should have stayed in compliance, not at the head of the table." The man in the navy suit seized the moment, voice booming. "Exactly. This board deserves stability, not spectacle. We can't have our institution represented by someone who doesn't inspire confidence." He pointed at the box she had set on the table. "You've reduced yourself to props, clutter, distractions. You think that speaks of leadership?" She said nothing. Her hands rested lightly on the box, as if steadying it, or steadying the storm about to come. At the far end of the room, a younger executive, slick hair, restless energy, tapped his pen against the folder in front of him. "Security's on standby," he announced, not to her but to the others, as though orchestrating consensus. His smirk was thin, cruel. "Better to have this resolved quickly, before the press catches wind. Imagine the headlines." The words landed like gasoline. Several board members nodded, murmuring approval. A woman near the middle adjusted her pearl earrings, her voice calm but cutting. "We need to protect our brand. Optics matter." Across the room, the junior associate shifted again, phone hidden low at his side. The red light still glowed. His jaw tightened as he recorded every word. The woman in white remained still, her silence like a blade unsheathed but not yet swung. She lowered her gaze briefly, not in defeat, but as if remembering. 26 years old. A loan officer had laughed in her face, calling her high risk, even after she'd provided 30% more collateral than required. He hadn't seen the woman who would one day buy the building his office sat in. He only saw skin, posture, clothes, just like today. The younger executive leaned forward, emboldened. "You've been tolerated long enough. Now it's time for you to exit with what little dignity you have left." He snapped his fingers. And as if rehearsed, two men in security uniforms appeared at the doorway. Their presence shifted the temperature instantly. Shoulders stiffened, eyes darted. The balance of the room tilted toward coercion. Still, she didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply lifted her head, meeting the security guard's eyes. Calm, steady, the kind of gaze that made men hesitate, even when ordered. The man in navy barked louder, trying to force momentum. "Escort her out. Now." "Oh." But her voice came, soft and measured, cutting through the rising tension. "Careful. This room is more fragile than you think." The words lingered, unsettling. For the first time, a crack appeared, not in her, but in them. The command to escort her out still hung in the air, heavy and vibrating against the glass walls. Yet the woman in white didn't shift an inch. The security guards hesitated at the threshold, as if the carpet itself resisted their steps. She breathed once, deep and unhurried. A calm so deliberate it silenced the murmurs at the table. No protest, no raised voice, just presence. Her hand smoothed the side of the box, fingertips brushing the frame within. That small act was louder than shouting an anchor in a storm. She looked neither afraid nor angry. She looked inevitable. The man in the navy suit slammed his palm against the table again, frustrated at her stillness. "Do you not understand? This isn't a negotiation. You're finished." Still, She said nothing. Instead, her eyes moved slowly from face to face around the table. Each director fidgeted in turn, caught in the quiet interrogation of her gaze. One drummed his fingers, another coughed into her hand, but none could hold her eyes. Her silence forced them into reflection or guilt. The guards stepped forward at last, the room's tension urging them on. Their footsteps echoed heavy against the carpet. One reached out, but paused, just shy of touching her arm. Her head turned slightly, a single raised brow halting him more effectively than any struggle. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. Think carefully before you lay hands on me. The younger executive sneered, mistaking restraint for fear. She has no fight left, he said, leaning back in his chair with smug certainty. She knows she doesn't belong here. But his words betrayed him, because everyone in that room could see it. The fight was there. Not loud, not reckless, controlled, condensed, a storm behind glass. In her mind, another memory flickered. Age 32, standing in a marble lobby, told she was in the wrong place because her dress was too simple for a penthouse reservation. She had smiled then, too. And hours later, that hotel chain would belong to her. The silence stretched, taut as a violin string. One board member shifted uncomfortably, muttering, "This is unnecessary." But the man in navy barked again, desperate to regain control. "Remove her!" Still she stood. Still she said nothing. Her posture was her protest. Her calm was her defiance. Finally, she placed the box back on the table, hands folded neatly atop it. Her voice, when it came, was soft enough to make the room lean closer. "You want noise, you want chaos, you won't get it. All you'll get is the truth, and the truth doesn't shout." The guards exchanged a glance. They didn't move, neither did she. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was weight, and it shifted, imperceptibly, toward her. The boardroom had become a stage. Every breath, every shuffle of paper, every cough carried like a drumbeat. Silence was her shield, but silence was also an invitation for someone else to step forward. At the far end of the table, the junior associate sat rigid, phone still angled in his palm. The red dot glowed faintly, unnoticed by most, but not by her. She glanced once, not at him, but at the reflection in the glass wall behind him. Their eyes met in that shimmer, his uncertain, hers steady. A quiet signal. "See, record, remember." He hesitated, thumb trembling above the screen. Finally, he tapped. The recording was no longer secret. His phone angled upright, lens catching the tableau, the box on the table, the woman in white standing unmoved, the navy-suited chairman leaning forward like a predator, and the two security guards stranded in hesitation. A whisper rippled across the room. One of the directors hissed, "Turn that off!" But he didn't. His voice came out rougher than expected, though not loud. "This isn't right," he said. The words cracked open the silence like a hairline fracture in glass. Small, almost fragile, but once there, impossible to ignore. The pearl earring director shot him a glare sharp enough to cut. "You're out of line." He swallowed, but his grip tightened on the phone. "Maybe, but I know what I'm seeing, and so will everyone else." Her eyes softened briefly. Not gratitude acknowledgement, a silent yes. The navy-suited man barked, "Security, remove him too." But the command sounded thinner now, strained, a man trying to hold back water with bare hands. The associate didn't back down. "If she doesn't belong here, then why is her name on every document I've ever filed? Why did I train under her signature?" Murmurs erupted, low and uneasy. Several directors shifted uncomfortably. One covered his mouth as though hiding agreement. Another scribbled faster, his pen scratching desperation. She remained still, letting his words fill the room. She didn't claim them, she didn't need to. The truth had found another voice. The guards wavered again. One muttered to the other, "This is above us." The navy suit turned red in the face. He slammed the table, spit flying. "This is insubordination. You'll regret this." But the junior only lifted his phone higher, catching every gesture, every insult, every ounce of contempt. The reflection in the window showed it all, the imbalance, the theater of arrogance unraveling. Finally, she spoke, her voice directed not at the chairman, not even at the board, but at the associate. Words matter more than footage, but sometimes you need both. The young man nodded, almost in relief. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted just enough for everyone to feel it. The silence no longer belonged to the man in navy. It belonged to her. The crack in the boardroom's silence widened. What began as a whisper from the junior associate had become something else, a challenge to authority. For the first time, the chairman's confidence looked brittle, and brittle men break loudly. He straightened his tie with a snap, then leaned across the table until his shadow stretched over her box. Enough of this theater. You've embarrassed this board for the last time. You're no leader, you're a liability. His words landed like blows. A few directors nodded sharply, eager to align themselves with the stronger voice, desperate to prove loyalty. The silver-haired woman in gray adjusted her blazer and added, "Our clients deserve stability. Not whatever this island." She gestured dismissively toward the woman in white as though pointing at a stain on the carpet. "This bank has no place for experiments. We can't afford to look weak." Her tone wasn't raised, but the contempt was surgical. Across the table, another board member joined in. He flipped through a folder and sneered, "You waltzed in here with nothing but a name and thought you could sit at this table. But names fade, reputations crumble. And without our approval, you're nothing." The younger executive with the restless energy laughed under his breath. "She'll leave one way or another. Question is whether she walks out or gets dragged." Gasps fluttered at the edges of the room. The junior associate shifted, but her hand lifted gently, a signal to wait, to hold. She didn't need saving. Not yet. Her calm only infuriated them more. The chairman slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing like a judge's gavel. "Effective immediately. Your access is revoked. Your position terminated. And your reputation," he paused for effect, his lips curling, "will be dust by the end of the week." He turned to the guards again, voice rising. "Take her out. She is no longer a client, no longer an executive, no longer anything." The words stung not because they were true, but because they revealed the intent to erase her existence from the very institution she had built. Still she stood, hands resting lightly on the box, gaze unbroken. Her silence pressed against them like a mirror. They saw themselves in it and hated the reflection. One director muttered nervously, This seems extreme." But the silver-haired woman cut him off sharply. "Do you want headlines about weakness? Do you want investors questioning us? Better one sacrifice than 1,000 rumors." The phrase hung in the air. One sacrifice. The chairman nodded slowly, savoring it. "Exactly. She is the cost of our credibility." The junior associate's phone caught every syllable. His knuckles whitened around the device. But the woman in white remained still, as if rooted deeper than their authority could reach. Her voice came finally, soft and deliberate. "You're not protecting this bank. You're destroying it. Every word you've spoken proves it." The room froze. And in that moment, it was no longer clear who was on trial. The boardroom reached its boiling point. Words had been weapons all morning, but now the men in power wanted spectacle, something physical, something final. The restless young executive stood abruptly, his chair screeching back across the carpet. He snatched a folder from the table, her folder, the one marked with her name, and held it high like a prop in a courtroom drama. "You want to talk about destruction?" he sneered. "Here's the proof. Worthless, fraudulent." And with a sharp tear, he ripped the pages in half. The sound was jagged, ugly, echoing in the sterile room like fabric tearing in church. Shreds of contracts, reports, and signatures fluttered to the floor. He let them fall deliberately at her feet. The box on the table shook as her hand tightened around its edge. But she didn't bend, didn't stoop. The chairman smirked, emboldened. "There at Island, evidence destroyed. No trace left of your so-called authority. Now get out." The security guards took a step closer, the gap closing. One reached for her arm. Gasps broke from the corners of the room. A few directors leaned back, disturbed by the escalation but unwilling to intervene. The silver-haired woman in gray said coldly, "Escort her through the lobby. Let everyone see. That will send the message." The younger executive laughed. "Exactly. Humiliation is the only language people like her understand." The junior associate nearly dropped his phone, his face pale. "This is illegal," he blurted. "You can't." "Shut up," the chairman snapped, finger stabbing the air again. "You're already out of line. One more word and you'll join her." The guard's hand finally touched her sleeve. That single contact shifted everything. The room inhaled sharply. Papers still floated to the ground. The chair still rocked where the young executive had stood. And she stood unyielding, her gaze locked forward, not on the guard, not on the chairman, but on the reflection in the glass wall, the entire boardroom on display, their ugliness visible in every angle. Her voice, when it came, was steel wrapped in silk. "Touch me again, and you won't just lose your job, you'll lose the roof over your head." The guard froze. His hand slipped back an inch, as if burned. But the chairman roared, desperate now. "Do it! Drag her out! Call the police if you must. She's trespassing." That word, trespassing, hung in the air like a curse. A claim that the woman who built the foundation of this place was nothing more than an intruder in it. The junior associate muttered under his breath, loud enough for the recording to catch. "She's not trespassing, you are." Her silence answered louder than any defense. For the first time since the meeting began, fear flickered in the eyes of the board. Not fear of her voice, fear of her stillness, fear of what was coming. The storm wasn't in her body, it was in the room itself, and it had already begun. The air snapped like a cable under strain. Papers still littered the floor, but now every eye was fixed on her. One guard hesitated inches away, unsure whether to advance. The chairman's command still rang in the room, trespassing, but the weight of that word was already turning against him. She placed the box gently back on the table, as though nothing had been disturbed. Then she reached into her blazer pocket, slow, deliberate, not frantic, not flinching. Her phone appeared in her hand, its black glass catching the overhead lights. The chairman scoffed. "Calling for help? Go ahead. No one can save you here." But her thumb slid across the screen with surgical calm. She lifted it to her ear. Her voice was low, controlled, but carried like a judge's verdict. "Activate legal protocol. Room 27 is live." A pause. Then a crisp, female voice answered on speaker, audible to the entire board. "Confirmed. Timestamp initiated. Audio and visual logging now active. External counsel en route." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. The pearl earring director stiffened. The young executive's smirk faltered. Even the guards glanced at each other, unease flickering across their faces. The junior associate's phone was no longer the only recording. Now the entire room was captured, every word branded into evidence. She continued, steady. "Escalate to level 4. Notify compliance, ethics, and shareholder relations." "Understood," came the reply. "Shareholders will be alerted within the next 5 minutes. Council has already dispatched to headquarters." The silver-haired woman snapped. "This is nonsense. She's bluffing." But the speakerphone chimed again. "Verification complete. Miss Carter, your controlling interest in this institution has been reconfirmed. Legal teams have access to this feed in real time." The name landed heavy, Miss Carter. Finally spoken, finally acknowledged. Murmurs rippled across the table. One director whispered, "Controlling interest?" Another paled, pen slipping from his fingers. The chairman's face tightened, but his voice rose, desperate. "Don't believe her theatrics. This is a stunt. She's nothing but—" "Careful," she interrupted, her tone like a blade slicing clean through his words. "Every insult you've spoken since this began is logged. Every command, every threat. When this file reaches the Board of Ethics, it won't be my silence on trial. It'll be your arrogance." The junior associate lifted his phone higher, emboldened. "She's right. It's all recorded." The guards took a step back, suddenly unwilling to be part of evidence that could end careers. She set her phone flat on the table, the speaker still live, her hands folded neatly beside it. She looked at the chairman and spoke quietly, yet the words struck harder than his shouting ever had. "You wanted me humiliated. Instead, you've given me a courtroom." And in that instant, the balance in the room shifted. Power no longer sat at the head of the table. It radiated from the woman in white, anchored in calm, amplified by the steady voice on the line and the silent witnesses in the room. The storm had turned, and now it was hers. The boardroom doors swung open without a knock. The sound cracked through the tension like thunder rolling into a dry valley. Every head turned. A line of black-suited attorneys strode in, briefcases in hand, eyes sharp and unblinking. Their arrival wasn't dramatic, it was inevitable. The room that had tried to shrink her now felt suddenly smaller for them. The lead counsel, a tall woman with a silver pin at her collar, walked straight to the table. She didn't look at the chairman. She didn't look at the board. She looked only at the woman in white. "Miss Carter," she said with crisp authority, "we've prepared the documentation, may we?" Carter nodded once, calm, controlled. The attorneys placed thick binders on the polished wood, the sound heavy, deliberate. Contracts, ownership records, acquisition files stamped with signatures and seals. Atop them all, a single sheet. Majority shareholder verified. The pearl earring director leaned forward, eyes wide. This can't be right. The junior associate, still filming, whispered almost to himself, "It's more than right. It's hers." The chairman shot to his feet, face flushed, hands trembling as they slammed against the table. "Lies! Forged documents! Do you really think we'll fall for this charade?" But the lead counsel slid a folder across the table. "This," she said evenly, "is the 2023 acquisition agreement, signed by every one of you, filed with federal regulators, public record. And the signature here," she tapped the line with one finger, "belongs to Miss Carter. Without her, none of you would even have seats at this table." Gasps broke the air. Several directors looked down at their own copies, pale and shaken. One murmured, I remember signing this." The young executive who had torn her papers earlier shrank visibly in his chair, his bravado dissolving under the weight of official seals staring back at him. Carter finally spoke, her voice steady and low, but carrying to every corner. "You called me a fraud in a bank I own. You tried to erase me from the institution I built. But the truth doesn't vanish when you tear a page. It only grows louder." Her eyes swept the room. Directors avoided her gaze now, unable to hold it. The guards had already stepped back to the doorway, hands folded behind them, as though silently conceding that they had no authority here. The junior associate lowered his phone slightly, no longer afraid. "They know now," he whispered. "Everyone knows." The chairman staggered back into his seat, sweat beading his forehead, his voice cracked, brittle. You set us up." Carter tilted her head, a faint shadow of a smile touching her lips. "Number I tested you, and you failed." The attorneys stood behind her like sentinels. The binders on the table were more than paper, they were. Judgment, weight, history. And in that moment, the woman in white was no longer the one on trial. She was the verdict. The room fractured, not in sound at first, but in silence, the kind of silence that swallows excuses whole. The directors who had smirked minutes earlier now sat rigid, their faces drained of color. Their power had evaporated faster than spilled water on hot stone. The pearl earring woman pressed trembling fingers to her mouth. She had demanded humiliation, demanded a walk of shame. Now it was her own reputation crumbling in front of witnesses. The younger executive, the one who had torn her documents, gathered the scraps on the floor in a panicked shuffle. His hands shook as he tried to press torn pages together, as if mending paper could mend credibility. But the binders on the table mocked him real, stamped, undeniable. The silver-haired director who once dismissed her as not the image clutched her notes so tightly the paper bent. She avoided Carter's gaze, staring at the glass wall instead. But the reflection betrayed her, showing her fear to everyone else. The guards who had hovered near the door exchanged a look. One muttered, "We're not touching her," before stepping back entirely, hands raised in quiet surrender. And then, movement from the back. The junior associate lowered his phone just enough to show his face. Relief flickered across his features, relief laced with vindication. He had captured it all, the arrogance, the tearing of documents, the slurs, and now the reversal. His voice cracked the tension like a spark. "They set you up, and the world's about to see it." Somewhere near the end of the table, a director whispered, "My God, we sided with the wrong man." The chairman sat slumped, red draining to gray. His knuckles gripped the table edge until it seemed the wood itself might splinter. He tried to speak, but only coughed, his authority collapsing into air. And then applause. It started softly, almost hesitant. The junior associate clapped once, then again, louder. The sound reverberated strangely in the boardroom. Within seconds, another joined in a clerk from the doorway, then another. Soon, the sterile air of the room filled with the unmistakable rhythm of hands striking together, breaking the old silence wide open. The applause wasn't celebration, it was judgment. It wasn't for victory, it was for truth. Carter didn't smile. She didn't bow. She simply stood, the box beside her, the binders before her, and let the sound wash over the same walls that had tried to cage her. One by one, directors shifted in their seats, each clap hammering their shame deeper. The silver-haired woman pressed her hands flat on the table as if to anchor herself. The young executive lowered his head, lips moving with a muttered apology too soft to matter. The chairman remained motionless, staring at nothing. Carter finally lifted the family photo from the box and placed it upright in front of her, framed steady against the wood. It was no longer just a keepsake. It was a reminder to them, to her, to the witnesses, that this place had always been hers. The applause didn't stop. It grew, and the boardroom, once an echo chamber of arrogance, became a courtroom of reckoning. The applause subsided into a hush, like the moment a gavel strikes before the sentence is spoken. Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority no longer required volume, only precision. She placed both hands flat on the table, the family photo standing between them like a witness. Her gaze swept the room, steady, unhurried. "Effective immediately," she said. "Gregory Vance," her eyes pinned the chairman, "is stripped of all authority. His access credentials are revoked. Security, log him out of every system." The lead attorney at her side tapped a tablet. A chime sounded. The chairman's name blinked red on the screen, locked out in real time. Gasps shivered through the boardroom. Carter turned next to the pearl earring director. "Your seat on this board is terminated. Your deliberate misconduct will be forwarded to federal regulators." The woman's lips parted, protest trembling on her tongue, but no sound emerged. She knew. The evidence was airtight. Her eyes shifted again to the young executive who had torn her documents. "You destroyed company records. That act alone is grounds for dismissal and prosecution. Consider your career over." The color drained from his face. He sat back heavily, fingers clutching at nothing. Carter's voice sharpened, still calm but final. "All contracts handled by these individuals are frozen. All accounts reviewed. Every action since this meeting began will be part of an official audit." The attorneys moved like clockwork, noting, logging, executing. Directors sat frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. They had watched her forced to her knees minutes ago. Now they watched careers crumble at the sound of her steady words. The junior associate whispered to himself, phone still raised. "She's rewriting the whole story." Carter stepped back from the table. "I don't need to shout. I don't need to beg. I am this institution, and anyone who tries to erase me will find themselves erased instead." The boardroom door swung shut behind the dismissed. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final. The boardroom no longer belonged to them. The binders, the attorneys, the silent witnesses, all of it testified to a single truth. The woman they tried to erase had been the foundation all along. Carter reached into the box one last time and lifted the silver-framed photograph. She set it upright at the center of the table, facing the directors who still remained. Her family's eyes gazed out across the wood like a reminder of roots too deep to uproot. She straightened, her white suit bright against the dark paneling. The room was hushed, the kind of silence that waits for verdicts. She gave it to them, each word deliberate. "You thought I was disposable, that I could be boxed up and carried out like clutter. But this bank is not your inheritance. It is my creation." She let the words settle, heavy as stone. "I don't need to film this moment," she continued, her voice low but carrying, "because I am the moment. Every insult, every attempt to erase me, every order to drag me out, none of it defines me. It defines you, and now the world will see the difference." The junior associate's camera captured her profile, the reflection in the glass wall behind her doubling her presence. To him, it didn't look like someone reclaiming power. It looked like someone who had never lost it. Carter gathered the box into her arms, not as baggage, but as proof. Proof of endurance. Proof of ownership. She turned toward the door, her steps unhurried, her spine unbroken. At the threshold, she stopped and looked back only once. "Remember this day, not because you tried to erase me, but because you learned you never could." Then she stepped out, the echo of her heels a rhythm of finality, leaving the boardroom draped in silence and shame. The story wasn't hers to carry anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told, "You don't belong here." And today, justice had spoken without raising its voice.